Welcome to Threads of Truth, the podcast where real-life mysteries meet internet speculation. Today, we're examining a case that began as a carefree night out in Boston and ended as one of the city's most disturbing unsolved mysteries.
Yeah, it's one of those cases that really just fundamentally alters your whole perception of safety in a crowd.
Right, because I think we usually equate isolation with, empty streets or dark rural highways.
Exactly, yeah. We almost never associate it with a crowded dance floor or a packed city sidewalk.
I mean, I want you, the listener, to try and put yourself in that exact environment for a second. Picture a Friday night in a major metropolitan area.
Right.
It's the summer solstice, June 21st, 1996, so the longest day of the year.
And you're young, you're 20 years old, surrounded by your friends.
Yeah, the energy is buzzing, the air is warm, the music is deafening. You just have that electric, invincible feeling. You are literally shoulder to shoulder with hundreds of people.
But the paradox of that scenario is actually terrifying when you break it down psychologically.
How so?
Well, a packed nightclub creates this illusion of communal safety, right? You feel protected because there are eyes everywhere.
Oh, absolutely.
But the reality is, a crowded venue can actually be the most isolating place on earth. You're surrounded by bodies, sure, but they're strangers. They're focused entirely on their own experiences.
Just completely in their own world.
Right. So in this loud, visually overwhelming, chaotic environment, just a single misstep or a momentary separation from your group causes you to slip completely off the radar.
Nobody is watching you.
Exactly. You could be standing in the middle of 1,000 people and just evaporate.
And that brings us to the story of Karina Holmer. She was a 20-year-old Swedish au pair who went out to celebrate the solstice in Boston's theater district.
Yeah.
She vanishes from a busy alleyway, and then 2 days later, a transient man searching for recyclables makes a discovery that is so horrific it literally paralyzes the entire city.
I mean, the logistics of her disappearance are what continually frustrate investigators even today.
Right. Like, how does a human being vanish from one of the most heavily trafficked nightlife districts in New England?
And then, only to be found in a condition that suggests just an impossible level of clinical premeditation.
The crime scene she left behind was so pristine, it offered practically zero forensic momentum.
None at all. But, before we analyze the timeline of that specific night, we really need to understand the cultural and geographic reality she was navigating.
Yeah, because Karina was essentially chasing a very specific version of the American dream, right?
She was. She grew up far removed from the chaos of an American metropolis.
Yeah.
She was from Alleryd, Sweden, which is this very quiet, small village.
Right.
And friends and family described her as just vibrant, adventurous, eager to expand her horizons. She wanted to see the world.
But like most 19 or 20-year-olds, she didn't exactly have the capital to just move across the globe.
No, not at all. Her ticket out was actually entirely serendipitous. She bought a lottery ticket in Sweden and won roughly $1,500.
Wait, really? A lottery ticket funded this whole thing?
Yeah, exactly. And instead of putting it in a savings account or, buying a car, she used that windfall to fund a transatlantic move. She arrived in the U.S. in March of 1996 to work as an au pair.
And the au pair industry in the mid-90s, it relied heavily on young European women coming over on J-1 visas.
Right, which is pitched as this great cultural exchange. But the reality is often a very complicated labor dynamic.
Yeah, it's a lot of pressure. So she secured a position with an affluent couple, Frank Rapp, who was a commercial photographer, and Susan Nichter, an artist and a university professor.
And they lived out in Dover, Massachusetts.
Right, which, if you know the area, Dover is an incredibly wealthy, bucolic, quiet suburb. It's about 15 miles southwest of Boston. Her job was to care for their 2 young children.
But you have to consider the absolute whiplash of her daily environment.
What do you mean?
Well, Monday through Friday, she's immersed in this domestic, highly controlled, wealthy suburban bubble, living right in her employer's home.
Right, totally isolated.
But when Friday evening rolls around, the dynamic completely shifts. Her employers would stay out in Dover, but they allowed Karina to use Frank Rapp's photography studio for the weekend.
Ah, and this studio was a loft located in South Boston.
Exactly. And South Boston in 1996 was a very, very different neighborhood than the hyper-gentrified version we see today.
Oh, for sure.
It was gritty, it was blue-collar, and it was right adjacent to the heart of the city's nightlife.
So having access to that loft gave her a home base. She used it to transition from, the isolated nanny in the suburbs to an independent 20-year-old exploring the bars and clubs of the Back Bay in downtown Boston.
She was basically living for the weekends. She'd meet up with this network of other international au pairs, just blowing off the stress of the work week.
But there is a detail from the weeks leading up to her disappearance that really colors everything that follows.
The letter.
Yes, the letter. She wrote a letter to her friends and family back in Sweden. And amidst all the normal updates about her life, she included a single, really chilling sentence.
She wrote that something terrible had happened.
Yeah. And she didn't elaborate at all. She merely promised to explain everything when she returned to Sweden.
I mean, that sentence has become the absolute focal point for endless online speculation. When a young woman writes that something terrible has happened and then she's murdered shortly after, it is incredibly difficult not to draw a straight line between those two events.
See, I'm actually going to push back pretty aggressively on that interpretation.
Really? Why?
Because whenever we examine unsolved mysteries, we fall victim to this retroactive true crime bias. We know she was brutally murdered, so we take a vague sentence and we imbue it with all this sinister, life-threatening weight.
That's fair.
I mean, I want to look at the reality of her situation. She was 20, living thousands of miles from home and allegedly working under precarious visa conditions.
Right, the J1 visa.
Yeah. So in the emotional vocabulary of a homesick 20-year-old, couldn't something terrible just mean, I don't know, a severe reprimand from her boss?
Or a sudden realization that she might be deported, yeah.
Exactly. Or even just a falling out with a new friend.
It is highly probable that the phrase was entirely mundane, actually. And we also have to factor in translation nuances from Swedish to English, where the severity of a word can be amplified or diminished when we talk about it now.
Right, a slight mistranslation of tone.
Exactly. And in the closed ecosystem of domestic employment, a dispute over scheduling or wages feels catastrophic to the employee because their housing and legal status are tied directly to the employer.
I completely agree. We project a premonition of murder onto a young woman who was likely just dealing with the overwhelming stress of adult responsibilities in a foreign country.
But the internet rarely lets go of a thread like that. I mean, rumors had circulated for years on forums that her employer, Frank Rapp, had a creepy reputation among the local au pair community.
We have to be incredibly careful here, though, because those rumors have absolutely zero verified foundation.
Right.
None. There are no police reports, no on-the-record accusations, and no evidence whatsoever to suggest any inappropriate behavior by her employers prior to the murder.
No, but investigators still had to look at the power dynamics. When someone is murdered, you have to evaluate the people who control their environment.
Of course, but that control vanished on the weekends anyway. So the timeline of the summer solstice night begins on Friday evening, June 21st.
Right, so Karina meets up with her network of European au pairs at that South Boston loft. They're socializing, pre-gaming, getting dressed up before heading into the city center.
And they eventually make their way to the theater district, specifically targeting a club called Zanzibar.
Right, Zanzibar. It was an upscale, massive venue located near Boylston Place.
And to understand the chaos of this environment, you really have to understand the geography of Boylston Place. It is a pedestrian alleyway tucked off Boylston Street, leading to several overlapping clubs.
Yeah, the noise, the foot traffic, the sheer volume of intoxicated people funneling into one narrow area is overwhelming.
Add to that the technological reality of 1996.
Oh yeah, no cell phones.
Exactly. If you get separated from your friends in a loud club today, you just send a text or check their location on your phone. In 1996, if you lose your group, you are entirely on your own.
You literally have to physically comb through hundreds of dancing bodies in strobe lighting just to find them.
And by 2 a.m, that isolation becomes really dangerous for Karina.
Witnesses, including the club staff, reported that she was severely intoxicated. She reached a point of incapacitation where she actually passed out in the venue's restroom.
Think about the vulnerability of that exact moment. You are in a foreign country, you do not have a strong geographical grasp of the city, your friends are lost somewhere in the crowd, and your motor functions are severely impaired.
A bartender eventually spots her and realizes she is in no condition to be alone. He instructs an assistant to help her outside and put her in a cab.
But the assistant turns away for just a moment to prepare to leave.
Just a moment.
And when they turn back, Karina is gone. She wandered away from the safety of the staff, presumably heading outside as the club began its closing procedures.
And this is where the investigation is plunged into an absolute nightmare of contradictory witness statements.
Right. The final sightings occur around 3 in the morning in the alleyway outside Zanzibar. Police interviewed multiple people who placed her in that specific location, but their accounts of what she was doing are wildly different.
Because memory is notoriously fragile. When you introduce sleep deprivation, loud environments, and heavy alcohol consumption, eyewitness testimony becomes almost useless.
It really does. I mean, one witness swore they saw Karina standing near the intersection of Boylston and Tremont Streets, dancing playfully with a homeless man.
Meanwhile, another witness claimed they saw a young woman matching Karina's description being physically manhandled and forced into a vehicle against her will.
And a third account came from a male acquaintance she had been socializing with earlier in the night.
Right. He told police he located her outside and offered to take her home. But she was in the company of 2 unidentified men sitting in a car.
According to him, those men aggressively told him to go away, and Karina remained with them.
So you have 3 completely divergent narratives happening within the same 50-foot radius at the exact same time.
She is either dancing with a transient, being violently abducted, or willingly leaving with 2 aggressive strangers.
And the police have absolutely no way to verify which drunken recollection is the truth. The only undeniable fact is that after 3 in the morning, Karina Holmer ceases to exist in the public record.
The trail goes completely dead for 24 hours. The city wakes up on Saturday, people go about their weekend, entirely unaware that a brutal crime has occurred.
It isn't until Sunday morning around 11 that the illusion of safety really shatters.
The scene shifts to the Fenway neighborhood, roughly a mile and a half away from the Zanzibar Club. There is an apartment building at 1091 Boylston Street.
And behind this building is an alleyway housing several large industrial commercial dumpsters.
A transient man is doing something incredibly common in any city. He is digging through the dumpsters looking for glass bottles and aluminum cans to recycle for cash.
He opens one of the dumpsters and notices a very heavy 50-gallon plastic trash bag.
Assuming it contains discarded food containers or, heavy recyclables, he rips the plastic open.
And instead of garbage, he finds a human arm.
He alerts the authorities immediately. The police arrive, secure the alley, and open the bag completely.
And I want to break down the sheer forensic horror of what the crime scene investigators found here, because it defies every expectation of a typical late-night homicide.
Right. It wasn't just a body.
No. The bag did not contain a complete body. It contained only the upper torso of Karina Holmer.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. The medical examiner later determined the cause of death was asphyxiation. She had been strangled with a ligature, likely a rope, cord, or some kind of wire.
And based on circumstantial indicators, there was also a strong suspicion of sexual assault.
But the bisection of the body is what escalated this from a tragic murder to a full-blown citywide panic.
Because the killer did not hack her apart in a panic frenzy.
Exactly. The medical examiner found that she had been severed in half with terrifying clinical precision.
The mechanics of this dismemberment are deeply unsettling. The killer used a saw to make a perfectly horizontal cut directly through her spine, passing between the lower ribs and the pelvis.
Which requires severing the thick lumbar vertebrae, cutting through heavy muscle tissue, and bypassing major organs without turning the process into a chaotic mess.
I compare it to a grim, industrial problem-solving exercise. A human body is dead weight. It is incredibly heavy and unwieldy, especially if you need to move it from a murder site into a vehicle and then lift it into a tall commercial dumpster.
So cutting the body in half solves the transportation problem. It makes the remains manageable for a single person to lift.
But the transportation aspect is only secondary to the forensic countermeasures, isn't it?
Oh, absolutely. The lower half of Karina's body was missing from the bag. In fact, despite massive search efforts across landfills and waterways, the lower half of her body has never been found.
And if this was a sexually motivated crime, the lower half of the victim contains the highest concentration of the killer's DNA, semen, pubic hair, skin cells.
By taking the time to separate the body and permanently dispose of the lower half, The killer essentially destroyed the biological blueprint of the assault.
And the condition of the upper torso further proves the killer's terrifying competence. We hear the term clean crime scene thrown around in media, usually meaning a killer wore gloves or wiped a doorknob.
Right.
This was a masterclass in forensic sterilization.
I mean, an average adult human body contains roughly 1.5 gallons of blood. When you sever a body in half, the resulting blood loss is catastrophic.
Yet, when police examined the heavy-duty trash bag, there was a complete absence of blood. The torso had been thoroughly drained before it was ever placed in the bag. And draining a body is not something you can do in the back of a van or in a dirt lot. You need a bathtub, an industrial sink, or a floor drain. You need running water.
Exactly. The killer also took the time to meticulously wash her body. They scrubbed her face so thoroughly that every trace of her nightclub makeup was completely removed.
When you analyze the requirements to accomplish this, you realize you are dealing with an incredibly dangerous psychological profile.
The killer needed an enclosed, private, secure location. They needed specific tools, a saw, heavy-duty bags, ligatures.
They needed access to plumbing.
Above all, they needed the psychological composure to spend hours intimately handling, draining, and sawing through a human being they had just strangled.
This was not a panicked mistake. This was a methodical process.
And that level of calculated execution left the Boston Police Department with almost nothing. They're staring at a washed, drained torso. No murder weapon, no lower half, no crime scene, and no DNA.
They did manage to secure one agonizingly small piece of evidence, though. Technicians lifted a partial fingerprint off the exterior of the plastic trash bag.
But we must contextualize forensic technology in 1996. The Automated Fingerprint Identification System, or AFI, was not the interconnected, lightning-fast digital network we use today. A partial print required a high-quality suspect print to match against. Furthermore, finding a print on a garbage bag doesn't mean it belongs to the killer.
Yeah, it could easily belong to the factory worker who packaged the bags, a store clerk, or the transient man who tore it open.
Exactly. So without forensic momentum, investigators relied on standard investigative protocol. You look at the people closest to the victim.
And they immediately focused their attention on her employers in Dover, Frank Rapp, and Susan Nichter. The timing of an incident at their property made them prime suspects almost instantly.
Yeah. The very next day, Monday, after the torso was discovered, the Dover Police Department responded to an emergency call at the employer's housing complex.
A commercial dumpster on their property was on fire.
I mean, you cannot blame the detectives for experiencing a massive adrenaline spike. A young woman is found dead in a Boston dumpster on Sunday, and on Monday, a dumpster at her employer's home mysteriously catches fire.
It looks exactly like an attempt to destroy evidence.
The Dover police extinguished the fire, secured the dumpster, and carefully collected the ashes. They transported those ashes directly to the Boston Police Crime Lab.
And forensic scientists spent hours sifting through the debris, looking for calcined bone fragments, metal hardware like zippers or belt buckles, or any microscopic traces of blood or tissue.
But the results were incredibly frustrating for the detectives. The analysis came back entirely clean.
The fire was deemed completely unrelated to the murder, just a bizarre, unfortunate coincidence.
Rapp and Nichter provided solid alibis, stating they had been at their Dover home all weekend hosting visiting relatives.
The police scrutinized their timeline, searched their property, and ultimately could not connect them to the crime.
The police also brought in Karina's alleged romantic interest, who happened to be a local police officer.
Oh, right. Given his profession, he would have knowledge of forensic countermeasures and access to secure locations.
However, he was thoroughly interrogated, his alibi was verified, and he was officially cleared as well.
So the investigation was burning through leads at an alarming rate, and every single one resulted in a dead end.
The physical spaces associated with Karina's final night began to fade away as well. Zanzibar lost its liquor license a few months later, in October.
The venue changed names, rebranded, and was eventually purchased by Emerson College and gutted to build dormitories.
The alleyway remained, but the club itself was erased, much like the evidence in the case.
And the absolute void of official answers created a vacuum, and the internet rushed in to fill it. For decades, forums like Reddit's Unresolved Mysteries have acted as massive, decentralized detective agencies poring over the few facts available.
They obsess over the contradictions of that night.
And one of the most cinematic and deeply unsettling theories generated by the public centers on the alleyway sightings.
Right. Among the chaotic witness reports, multiple people consistently mentioned seeing a very distinct individual lingering outside the club as it closed.
It was a large, older man wearing a Superman t-shirt, walking a massive white dog.
Investigators did not dismiss this sighting at all. They actively pursued it and successfully identified the man as Herb Whitten.
He was a resident of Andover, Massachusetts, which is a suburban town located about 25 miles north of Boston.
I want to pause and look at the geography and behavior here. It is 3 a.m. An older man drives 25 miles from his quiet suburb into the chaotic epicenter of Boston's nightlife, simply to walk his large dog in an alleyway outside a nightclub as heavily intoxicated young women are pouring out onto the street.
The behavior screams predation. It is practically a hunting tactic, using a large, friendly-looking dog as an icebreaker to engage with vulnerable people.
It is deeply suspicious behavior, and the detectives recognized that. They brought Whitten in for questioning.
But when they pulled his records for that night, they slammed into a brick wall.
Whitten possessed an ironclad documented alibi. In the early morning hours of Saturday, June 22nd, Whitten was pulled over by the Andover Police Department for speeding and driving under the influence.
He was issued a citation, meaning there was a time-stamped official police record placing him in his vehicle in Andover.
I want to break down the math of that alibi because it is the only thing keeping Whitten from being the prime suspect. Karina is last seen around 3 a.m.
And Andover is roughly a 40-minute drive from Boston without traffic.
Whitten is pulled over in Andover shortly after 4 a.m. That gives him just over an hour.
The bisection and draining of the body make that timeline physically impossible. Even if Whitten abducted her at 3 a.m. and immediately drove her to Andover, he would barely have enough time to commit the murder before being pulled over.
He certainly would not have the hours required to drain her blood, meticulously wash her face, surgically sever her spine, package the body, and then drive all the way back into downtown Boston to dump the torso on Boylston Street.
The logistics clear him, but the internet sleuths refuse to let him go because the subsequent details of his life are incredibly dark.
Oh yeah. Years later, on a Reddit forum, a user claiming to have grown up 2 houses down from Whitten in Andover shared a really disturbing anecdote.
What did they say?
They claimed that in the weeks surrounding Karina's murder, the entire neighborhood was subjected to the overpowering, sickly smell of burning meat radiating from Whitten's property.
We have to apply rigorous skepticism to anonymous internet anecdotes, though. Memory is malleable, and true crime communities often suffer from confirmation bias. Fitting spooky details into a preconceived narrative.
Absolutely. However, the official record regarding Whitten takes a grim turn regardless. In January of 1997, barely 6 months after Karina was killed, Herb Whitten committed suicide.
And the method of suicide is vital to discuss. He didn't overdose on pills or run his car in a garage. He slit his own throat.
Which is an intensely violent, deeply personal, and painful way to end your own life. It requires a profound level of self-hatred, desperation, or overwhelming guilt.
To compound the suspicion, contemporaneous newspaper reports indicated that Whitten's lawyer stated the suicide was motivated by a fear of exposure.
Exposure of what? Was he terrified that the police were closing in on him for Karina's murder?
Or was he engaging in a completely different set of illicit behaviors, perhaps soliciting prostitutes or stalking women, and the intense police scrutiny brought on by his proximity to the Holmer case threatened to ruin his life?
It remains one of the great tangential mysteries of the case. But unless he had an accomplice who handled the dismemberment and disposal while he was getting a DUI in Andover, the physics of time and space simply do not allow him to be the sole perpetrator.
This forces us back to the broader statistical debate. If not Whitten, who? We constantly hear that violence against women is rarely random.
Right. Statistics from the Rape, Abuse, and Incest National Network, or RAINN, demonstrate that 7 out of 10 sexual assaults are committed by someone the victim knows: an employer, a friend, a neighbor.
And the acquaintance theory heavily informs the forensic countermeasures. A stranger who abducts someone off the street leaves no digital or social footprint connecting them to the victim.
If a stranger leaves DNA behind, It only matters if their DNA is already in a criminal database. But an acquaintance knows that police will immediately pull phone records, interview friends, and establish a social link.
If an acquaintance leaves DNA, they are guaranteed to be caught.
Therefore, the monumental effort required to bisect the body and destroy the lower half points strongly to an offender who knew they would be interviewed by police.
I understand the logic, but I'm going to argue fiercely for the stranger theory here.
Oh, really?
Yeah, look at the specific geography of her disappearance. She is heavily intoxicated, stumbling around a dark alleyway in a city she barely knows. She is the textbook definition of a vulnerable target.
You believe she fell victim to a crime of opportunity. A predator who was cruising the theater district, specifically looking for someone separated from their pack.
Well, wait, let me rephrase. The opportunity is undeniable. But a crime of opportunity usually implies a disorganized, panicked crime. A mugging gone wrong, a sudden assault in an alley.
True.
This crime was aggressively organized. The killer had a location prepared. They had plastic sheeting, saws, and a drainage system ready to go before they ever laid eyes on Karina. They were hunting, and they were prepared for the catch.
The preparedness of the workspace contrasts violently with the sheer recklessness of the disposal site, though. Let us map out 1091 Boylston Street.
Walk the listener down that street. If you are standing at that dumpster, you are half a block away from the intersection of Boylston Street and Massachusetts Avenue.
And Mass Ave is one of the major circulatory arteries of Boston. It is heavily trafficked 24 hours a day.
Furthermore, the alleyway where the dumpsters were located was a well-lit blind corner. It was entirely exposed to the street.
Even worse for a killer, the dumpster was situated directly across the street from one of the few late-night pizzerias operating in the area at that time.
Just imagine the brazenness required.
Yeah.
You pull a vehicle up to a lit alleyway, you open the trunk, drag out a 50-pound plastic bag containing human remains, and heave it up over the lip of a commercial dumpster.
At any second, a taxi could turn the corner, a police cruiser could roll past on Mass Ave, or a group of college students getting pizza could walk out the door. It is an insane risk.
It really is. It suggests two opposing psychological states. Either the killer was incredibly arrogant and thrived on the thrill of nearly being caught, or they panicked.
They may have been driving around with the torso in their trunk, realized daylight was approaching, and simply dumped it in the first commercial bin they could find without understanding the foot traffic of the neighborhood.
But the panic theory falls apart when you look at what happened to the lower half. The disposal of the torso is clumsy, but the disposal of the lower half was a masterstroke of evasion.
This brings us to the Harvard Bridge theory, which I find to be the most chilling and logical explanation generated by online investigators.
The geography aligns perfectly with this theory. The dumpster on Boylston Street is less than a mile straight down Mass Ave from the Harvard Bridge, which spans the Charles River, connecting Boston to Cambridge.
And the architecture of that bridge makes it the perfect disposal site. The balustrades, the railings along the pedestrian walkway are very low.
Right. So if you have a heavy object in your trunk, you don't need to hoist it over your head. You can pull your car over to the curb in the dead of night, open the trunk, and simply tip the bag over the low railing.
It drops directly into the dark, murky waters of the Charles River.
The hydrology of the river assists the killer. The currents would carry the bag away, and the water would degrade any external evidence.
If the lower half was weighted down, it could sink into the deep silt at the bottom of the river and remain undiscovered for decades. It is a terrifyingly efficient, fast, and untraceable disposal method.
It demonstrates a killer who really understands the landscape of Boston. They utilize the industrial dumpsters of the Fenway and the dark waters of the Charles River to effectively erase a human being.
Which leads us to the ultimate question. Why does this case still haunt seasoned Boston homicide detectives over a quarter of a century later?
It haunts them because of the profound escalation it represents. Homicide detectives are accustomed to gang violence, domestic disputes, and robberies gone wrong.
They're not accustomed to finding meticulously sanitized, bisected torsos.
No. The clinical nature of the dismemberment suggests a killer who has practiced, or at the very least, a killer who possesses a psychopathic detachment from human suffering.
I keep coming back to the workspace. You do not wake up one morning, spontaneously decide to abduct a woman, and then magically find yourself standing in a room equipped with heavy-duty saws, plastic tarps, and an industrial drain.
The killer had a facility. It could have been a warehouse in South Boston, a private garage, or a soundproofed basement. But they built a slaughterhouse before they ever had a victim.
And that level of premeditation means Karina was likely not the first person this individual harmed, and she was almost certainly not the last.
The case remains unsolved, primarily because the 1996 forensic limitations compounded the destruction of evidence.
The killer relied on the chaos of the nightclub to scramble witness timelines, and they relied on the bisection to eliminate DNA.
The physical exertion required to pull this off is staggering. Dead weight is exhausting to maneuver.
The killer exerted massive physical energy to saw through bone, carry 50-pound bags, and clean a crime scene until it was spotless.
They orchestrated a complex, multi-stage nightmare, and when the sun came up, they simply blended back into the fabric of the city.
They likely went to work on Monday. They stood in line at the grocery store, stopped at red lights next to police cruisers, and carried the absolute knowledge of what they had done without ever betraying a hint of guilt.
It forces us to confront the vulnerability of people like Karina. She was seeking the excitement of a new country. She wanted to learn, explore, and dance.
But the barriers of language, the isolation of her employment, and the intoxication of a Friday night stripped away her defenses.
She encountered a predator who recognized that vulnerability and exploited it with absolute ruthlessness.
The absence of the lower half of her body is a constant physical reminder of the killer's victory over the justice system.
As long as those remains are missing, the full narrative of the violence she endured remains locked away in the mind of the person who committed it.
I want you to reflect on how quickly the mundane becomes irreversible.
You can be standing in a packed nightclub, surrounded by music, laughter, and the heat of a summer night. You feel invincible.
But in the time it takes to walk down a dark alleyway, you can slip through the cracks of humanity and become part of a city's darkest folklore.
The terrifying reality is that the architect of this nightmare might still be alive, walking the streets of Boston, carrying the memory of the solstice night in total silence. Next time, we examine the strange case of Raymond Robb involving a beach disappearance, life insurance money, and a story that quickly began to unravel.